It was 11:42 p.m., and the warehouse loft was silent except for the low hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the concrete floor. Elara sat hunched over the metal table, a bitter cup of coffee in hand, the cheap 50-cent mug warming her fingers more than the liquid ever could. Her laptop lay open, spreadsheets flickering across the screen, but she wasn't working. At least, not on the logistics problems she normally tackled. She was waiting. Or so she told herself. The phone buzzed, sharp and urgent, breaking the fragile calm. Elara's thumb hovered over the screen before she swiped to answer. The voice on the other end was frantic, familiar yet distant. "Elara, you have to come now. I don't have time to explain." Not a hello, sweetheart. Not a I'm sorry. Just pure panic and expectation. The same pattern she had known for years. 3 years, 4 months, 12 days since her father had last called, or spoken for that matter. Her first reaction wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was curiosity, the kind reserved for a scientist presented with a problem she couldn't yet solve. Her fingers twitched near the keyboard as her mind started logging questions instead of emotions. Why now? What's the context? Who else is involved? Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment and let me know. How long would you go without speaking to your parents before you decided the relationship was officially over? Let me know your number below. Elara didn't rush to pack a bag or nod to whatever crisis her father conjured. She didn't feel the old 18-year-old fear that had propelled her out of the house with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart. She was 24 now, a logistics manager with an analytical mind honed to catch patterns where others saw chaos. She sipped her coffee, tasted the bitter contrast to the sugary fake conversations her family had thrived on, and made a decision. She would investigate first. Her laptop screen glowed brighter, rows of public records and background checks filling the screen as she typed. This wasn't defiance. It was survival, strategy, and the refusal to hand over her life to impulsive sentiment. The transformation from abandoned daughter to strategist was subtle, almost invisible, but it had taken years of painstaking self-reliance to reach this point. Tonight, she wouldn't answer her father's demands. She would answer questions. Elara's fingers flew across the keyboard with the precision of a seasoned logistics manager. The glow of the laptop illuminated her focused expression, shadows dancing across the metal table. She navigated county clerk records with ease, cross-referencing public filings and corporate documentation. Her analytical mind treating every piece of data like a shipment to be tracked, timed, and accounted for. She found the banking interfaces next. Old accounts she had long forgotten surfaced with a mix of relief and disbelief. Login credentials that her family had neglected to revoke years ago. It was almost comical in its negligence. Elara smirked, the corners of her lips curling in a way that was cold and deliberate. This wasn't about sentiment. It was about leverage. Then she found it. Aunt Lydia's trust deed, buried under layers of scanned PDFs and legalese. Her eyes zeroed in on Clause 4, Section B. The words crystallized into a revelation that made her heart pound, not with fear, but with strategic triumph. The clause was clear. As a named signatory, Elara had not just access, she had legal authority. The minimum balance requirement was set at $100,000, yet the current balance barely scratched $12,000. The realization hit her like a calculated explosion. They weren't calling her because they missed their daughter. They were calling her because legally, she was the boss. Elara leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to savor the shift. The fortress she had built out of solitude, every choice and sacrifice that had fortified her independence, suddenly became her strongest weapon. She imagined her family standing at the gates, their panic and entitlement impotent against the walls she had spent years constructing. The cold smile spread across her face, not of cruelty, but of clarity. Every decision she had made, the years spent mastering logistics, the late nights balancing budgets, the detached analysis of people's motives, had led her to this moment. She was no longer the girl who left home with a backpack and a broken heart. She was the one in control, and the playing field had finally shifted. Elara began drafting a mental blueprint, mapping out the audit she would conduct. Every account, every transaction, Every document would be scrutinized with the meticulous care of a strategist preparing for battle. She imagined the patterns forming before her eyes, weaknesses to exploit, risks to mitigate, and opportunities to seize. The night deepened outside the warehouse loft, but inside, Elara felt electric energy. This was more than a discovery. It was the first step in reclaiming power that had always been hers by law, and by intellect. For the first time, she wasn't reacting. She was anticipating, calculating, and positioning herself to win by the time she closed the last tab. The map of her next moves was clear. The game had changed, and Elara was no longer playing catch-up. She was orchestrating the play. I wasn't waiting for them to love me. I was waiting for them to see me. That was the reality of being the glass child, a term psychologists use for siblings of high-maintenance or attention-commanding children. Not abused, not mistreated, just invisible. My existence was a constant hum in the background, easily ignored, rarely acknowledged. My needs, my triumphs, even my pain. All of it was unnoticed. The architecture of neglect was subtle, almost imperceptible. While Tyler's suspension caused a flurry of parental attention, and Brittany's casting call drew applause and celebration, I stood in the doorway of my own birthday party for 10 minutes, unseen. My 18th birthday. The one that should have marked the transition into adulthood, the one moment for acknowledgement. But the house was full of laughter, chaos, and selfies. None of them for me. I shifted from foot to foot, hoping someone, anyone, would notice when the attention didn't come. I quietly slipped to the dark kitchen, where a note meant for the housekeeper lay on the counter. My parents didn't even glance at me as they spoke over my head, congratulating Tyler or gushing about Brittany's next callback. The weight of invisibility pressed down so heavily that night. I remember curling up on my bed and realizing something profound. The daughter in me had died, and the architect was born. The architect didn't wait for permission, for validation, for acknowledgement. I spent the next 4 years quietly building my escape. $3,800 accumulated slowly, methodically, a testament to persistence and strategy. Tutoring underclassmen after school. Selling leftover lunch tickets. Counting every dollar like it was a brick in a fortress I was constructing. I wasn't stealing, I was planning. I wasn't abandoning them. I was resigning from a job I was never being paid for. On the night of my departure, I packed the cash into a Ziploc bag. At 2 a.m. I slipped out, careful not to slam the door, careful not to announce my existence. I walked into a world where I could finally be seen. I waited for reactions, curiosity, panic, anger, but there was nothing for 3 months. Not a single phone call, not a single knock. My absence was barely noticed. Then finally a call came. Not about me, not about where I was, but a routine question from my mother about the cable bill autopay. That was the moment it all crystallized. My parents' neglect wasn't malicious. It was habitual. My invisibility had been a constant, and yet it had inadvertently forged the skills and resilience I would need later. Observation, patience, strategic thinking, and the quiet courage to walk away when recognition never came. Being a glass child had taught me more about survival and agency than any parental guidance could. I hadn't been a victim. I had been an architect in training. And now, years later, when I faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, I knew I already carried the blueprint for resilience inside me. The morning sun had barely crested the skyline when Elara's phone erupted in a symphony of notifications. Texts, group chats, voicemails. Every app seemed to conspire against her peace. She didn't even need to look. The names alone told the story. Brittany, Tyler, Mom, Dad. Her thumb hovered over the first message, a voice note from Brittany that dripped entitlement and accusation. "You can't just ignore us, Elara. This is family." Brittany's words echoed in the tiny loft, but Elara heard them for what they were. An attempt to manipulate, to guilt, to control. Her mother followed with her own digital weapon. A photo, carefully curated, a trip down memory lane meant to make Elara's chest tighten. Elara stared at it, unflinching. This was the past weaponized. A nostalgia grenade designed to disrupt the present. Tyler, predictably, escalated further, threatening the police over a missing set of car keys. Keys Elara hadn't touched in years, and in the past, any one of these messages would have broken her. Anyone would have sent her spiraling, apologizing, begging for reconciliation she didn't feel ready to grant. But that girl, the 18-year-old who left with $3,800 in a backpack, was gone. Elara paused, taking a breath, and applied her first principle of the day, the sunk cost fallacy. She considered every second, every tear, every hour of unpaid emotional labor her family had expected from her. It was gone. Irretrievable. And yet they tried to leverage it against her as if she owed them more. She realized with chilling clarity. Guilt is just a currency, and her family was bankrupt. The strategic response came naturally. She deleted the unproductive messages. She archived the conversations that might matter later. Screenshots were captured and labeled evidence, methodically filed for reference. Emotion had no place here. Data and documentation did. Her next step was not to defend herself, to argue, to beg, or to plead. She would see a lawyer, not to negotiate reconciliation, but to prepare an eviction notice, metaphorically and legally staking her claim. Her family had mistaken history for leverage, but Elara had learned that leverage without evidence was impotent, and in that moment, she reflected on the contrast between past and present selves. 18 years of unpaid emotional labor had been heavy, almost suffocating. But now, she could observe the chaos without being crushed by it. She understood in the core of her being that economics, even behavioral economics, trump sentimentality. You cannot explain sunk costs, scarcity, or opportunity cost to people who think the world owes them a living. Elara looked at her phone, silent now except for the hum of incoming notifications. She smiled, cold, strategic, ready. The siege had begun, but she would not be the victim this time. She had rules, resources, and a plan. And when the dust settled, she would still be standing, the architect of her own domain, while the family who had ignored her for years scrambled in confusion. Julian arrived first. His law textbook still under his arm, the corners bent and highlighted into submission. Sarge followed a few minutes later, silent as ever, leaning against a support beam like he'd seen worse rooms and worse secrets. The warehouse felt different in daylight, less forgiving, more exposed. Elara slid her laptop across the metal table and waited. Julian didn't waste time. "I think I know why they're panicking," he said, pulling up a transaction log. February 14th. 6 months ago. The screen populated with numbers and timestamps. Elara leaned in. One line glowed brighter than the rest. $40,000 wire transfer. Destination: an offshore betting account routed through a shell intermediary. Status: rejected. Reason: biometric mismatch. Her breath slowed. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a gavel. "They tried to move money from the trust," Julian continued. "And they didn't just try, they forged it." He zoomed in on the authorization page. Erara's name stared back at her, written in her handwriting. Or something close enough to pass at a glance. Sarge let out a low whistle. "That's traced," he said. "Old documents. Probably tax forms or school records. Amateur mistake." Elara felt something inside her go very still. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was criminal. The wire hadn't failed because of insufficient funds. It failed because the system flagged the signature against biometric markers. The trust had rejected its own thief. "They need me," Elara said slowly. "Not access. Approval." Julian nodded. "Retroactive authorization. If you sign now, it reframes the transfer as consent. Without that, it's attempted fraud. Felony level." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Elara finally understood the call. The urgency. The sudden remembrance of her existence. Her father wasn't afraid of losing the house. He was afraid of prison. The last thread of hesitation snapped. Cleanly. Quietly. All the emotional ambiguity, the years of wondering if she was being too harsh, too distant, too cold, evaporated in an instant. This wasn't family drama. This was a cover-up. They hadn't reached out to reconcile. They had reached out to recruit her as a shield. Elara straightened, her voice steady. "As successor trustee, I'm entitled to inspect the property. Julian blinked, then smiled. Yes, he said. You absolutely are. Sarge pushed off the beam. Guess you're paying a visit. Elara closed the laptop. They wanted Elara to show up. Fine. She was on her way. But they were about to find out the daughter they ignored had been replaced by a landlord they couldn't afford. This wasn't revenge. It was enforcement. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was inefficient. She was precise, calculated, prepared. For the first time since the phone call, Elara felt something close to peace. The fog had lifted. The threat had a shape. And now that she could see it clearly, she knew exactly how to dismantle it. One document, one inspection, one irrevocable consequence at a time. Elara parked the pickup at the end of the long, cracked driveway and cut the engine. The fountain in the center of the circular drive was dry, its stone basin stained and flaking, a monument to appearances that could no longer afford water. She took a moment, breathing in the stillness, then stepped out in steel-toed boots and a canvas jacket stiff with wear. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked to the front door and let herself in. No knocking. She still had her key. Inside, the family was gathered around the dining table like a twisted Thanksgiving dinner frozen mid-argument. Voices stopped. Chairs scrape. Shock rippled across their faces as they took her in. Taller somehow, broader in presence, occupying space they hadn't realized they'd surrendered. Her father recovered first. He always did. Elara, he said, softening his voice, reaching for familiarity like a lever. You didn't have to come in like this. She ignored the tone and set a manila folder on the table. Actually, she said calmly, I did. The release form was on top, unsigned. Untouched. She picked up the pen, held it between her fingers, then let it drop. The sound was sharp, final. I'm not signing anything. Her father's jaw tightened. You don't understand. We were just borrowing. February 14th, Elara said, cutting him off. 6 months ago. $40,000. Offshore betting account. Wire transfer rejected due to biometric mismatch. The room collapsed inward. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Tyler shifted in his chair, already coiling. You forged my signature, Elara continued, her voice level. Traced from archived documents. That's attempted fraud. A felony. Her father started to speak, then stopped. For the first time, fear showed. Not of losing the house, but of losing his freedom. Elara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She recited the trust deed violations like inventory. Breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized transaction attempts, failure to maintain minimum balance, misrepresentation of authority. Each item shrank them further into their chairs. Her mother stood. Elara, please. This is our home. Elara turned to her, unflinching. You housed me here, she said quietly. You didn't raise me. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. You raised yourself in the spaces you forgot to check. Tyler lunged forward, anger flashing across his face, but Sarge, silent until now, stepped just enough into view that Tyler stopped cold. No confrontation. No debate. Power recognized power. Elara closed the folder and slid it back toward the center of the table. Here's what happens next. You have 30 days to vacate. The house goes on the market Monday. Her father stood abruptly. You can't do this. I can, Elara said. And I am. She paused at the doorway, turning back once, delivering the final accounting. You taught me everything is a transaction. I'm the most valuable asset you have. And I just decided to liquidate. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her. Clean, definitive, cutting off the eruption of voices, accusations, and panic that followed. She didn't look back. The pickup started on the first turn. As she drove away, the house loomed smaller in the mirror, its chaos contained, its leverage gone. For the first time, Elara felt the quiet certainty of ownership. Not just of property, but of herself. Elara drove until the house became a shape, then a suggestion, then nothing at all in the rearview mirror. There was no victory lap, no surge of adrenaline. Just relief, settling into her bones like gravity finally working the way it was supposed to. She pulled over once, on a stretch of road where the city gave way to open sky. The phone came out steady in her hand. One by one she deleted the contacts. Not blocked. Deleted. I didn't block them out of anger, she thought. I deleted them because they were no longer relevant to the operation. No ceremony. No lingering. Just clarity. By the time she reached the warehouse, the sun was sinking low, painting the concrete walls in copper and gold. She stepped inside and slid the metal bolt home, the sound clean and final. It was a sound she trusted. There are different kinds of silence, Elara realized. There's the silence of neglect, the hollow, echoing absence that makes you doubt your own existence. And then there's the silence of peace. The kind you find in cathedrals and libraries. The kind that holds you instead of erasing you. She returned to the drafting table, the blueprints waiting where she'd left them. Fresh paper. Clean lines. Strong foundations. Load-bearing walls designed with intention instead of hope. She picked up a pencil and drew the first new line slowly, deliberately. That's when the truth settled fully into place. She hadn't just survived. She had dismantled a rotting structure piece by piece and had the courage to clear the land afterward. I wasn't just a survivor, she realized. I was an architect. She was alone, and she had never felt more complete. Sometimes you have to demolish the old foundation to build a life that can actually hold you. If you've ever had to be the architect of your own peace, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to follow for more stories about breaking the cycle.